My name is Erica Sanborn, and I'm an Assistant Program Director for the Genetic Counseling Program here at Sarah Lawrence. I also am the Director of the admissions process. I graduated from the program about 12 years ago, but since my view as being a student is pretty outdated, hopefully we will have a current student, Rob Rigabello, join us on the line at some point during the call. In addition, we have Denise Pugh with us from Graduate Studies, who helped create our online application system and is the expert with that. So any questions that I cannot answer around applying online, hopefully she will be able to answer for us. And we have Katrina Ruth Lee as well, who is helping us host the webinar from a technology standpoint, and we can't be more grateful that they are here with us. So thank you guys. One thing that Katrina will be doing today is recording the webinar so that it can be posted on our website so that you can return to it at any point in the next week to review anything that was discussed. But our goal today is pretty simple. We want to try to answer questions you have about the admissions process and to make the whole process seem a little bit less overwhelming. In the next hour and a half, we'll review some of the most commonly asked questions broken into the categories you see here, but we'll be focusing mostly on the application itself, and then open the discussion up for you guys to ask any and all questions you might have. We found it easiest for people to type in their questions via chat, and this can be done through the webinar portion, and I will answer the chat questions to everybody. Unfortunately, there are some topics which I am definitely not the expert for, and these are around financial aid and a lot of international student issues. So if you can take down the contact information that you see on the slide in front of you, these are topics that we will not cover today and topics that I am definitely not the best person to answer questions on. So I wanted to give you those people's contact information, and I can go back to this slide at any time if you're not able to take down the full information before we move on. As most of you have probably seen on our website thus far, we have similar prerequisite courses to many of the other programs. Here at Sarah Lawrence, we do not require organic chemistry or psychology, but they are recommended. Otherwise, the list is pretty similar. The goal of the prerequisite coursework is to provide you foundational knowledge in these topics, so you are prepared to succeed with the rigorous academic expectations of graduate school. As such, these courses can be completed at a four-year institution, at a community college, or online, but should produce a grade and be at a level that prepares you for graduate school. If you're unsure if a course is at an appropriate level or meets an appropriate subject area, we recommend that you check in with the professor of that course or your academic advisor if you're still a current student. He or she is the best person to answer whether that course will prepare you for graduate level work in a given subject area. It's natural to want to ask us if something counts, but it is really impossible for us to determine this based on course titles or even syllabi from so many different institutions. While laboratory experience can be beneficial, it's not a prerequisite in and of itself, and thus the lab components of these classes are not required. We recognize that many individuals are still taking classes at the time that they apply to our program, and thus it is not uncommon for applicants to have one prerequisite class pending at the time they apply. The rule for us here at Sarah Lawrence is that the prerequisite classes must be completed before you matriculate into the program. So as long as you finish the class before you come for orientation, you should be good to go. But obviously, the more complete your application at the time of the deadline, the more we have to evaluate you on when offering invitations for interviews. For individuals thinking of genetic counseling as a change of career, not all prerequisites would have to be repeated if they were taken many years ago, but subjects that have changed significantly, such as genetics, should definitely be updated. So hopefully most of you have completed these prerequisites, maybe have one pending. If you have multiple of these prerequisites pending, you may want to consider holding off your application and make it more complete for a future cycle. Another question that we often get asked is how high does my GPA have to be in these classes to be considered a competitive candidate? We do not have a minimum GPA to be considered for the program, but the higher the GPA, obviously, the better. As you can see from the slide, the average GPA for all individuals accepted into genetic counseling programs across North America is around a 3.5. This is data pulled together from all the program directors of the North American programs. If your undergraduate GPA is not as high as you would like or think it is not representative of your academic capabilities, we'd recommend repeating one or two of the prerequisite courses to show you're capable of receiving higher marks in those areas. Also, strong GRE scores can help combat lower GPA scores. Lastly, if you received poor grades in undergraduate, you obviously can't go back and change them, but please speak to them in your personal statement. You know we're going to see them, so you can answer the question about them in advance. Lastly, for international students, especially non-Canadian students, it's important to have your transcript translated and interpreted. Two companies that are typically used for this purpose are WES or AACRO. So those are some kind of guidelines around GPA. But since I just mentioned GREs, and as you can see there are some numbers on the slide in front of you, let's talk a little bit more about the GREs. This year, Sarah Lawrence is requiring the GRE for all applicants, whether you have a previous graduate degree or not. We know that sometimes the reports will reach us after the application deadline, and that is okay, but the test itself should be taken before December 15th or the application deadline. You can see here the average scores of accepted students into the North American programs. The only other required test is for international students who did not complete their undergraduate or graduate studies at an institution where English was the primary language. So for students in this scenario, the TOEFL is required and the college looks for a score of 100 or more. So there's some information about the testing. But there's two other big prerequisite areas that can generate a lot of confusion. So let's start with the experience in the genetic counseling field because I think it's the easier of the two. Traditionally, this is typically meant shadowing, which is still an ideal way to gain knowledge about the field, but it isn't possible everywhere. And obviously, you can't be held accountable for getting experience that was not available to you. But programs are intense, and we want to make sure that you know enough about and are passionate about the field that you're entering. So if you cannot get shadowing experience, or even if you can, we recommend having informational interviews with other genetic counselors. If you go to the NSGC or the National Society of Genetic Counselors website and search for a genetic counselor, there's a field in which counselors have checked off whether contact from students is welcome. Students in this case means you guys, basically prospective students. So if it says yes, that is permission for you to reach out to them. And with modern technology, they don't need to even live in your geographic area. These interviews can give you tremendous insight into the day-to-day lives of genetic counselors in various differing roles. In addition, if there's a hospital in your area but shadowing isn't allowed, maybe you can try to set up an unpaid internship or attend rounds or case conferences. These are all just ways to be around genetic counselors, hear how they work up a case, etc. Basically, we want you to get to know the field you want to be a part of. Sounds pretty simple. We know it's not that easy. But with regards to the advocacy and counseling work, this is a much broader area, and probably there are many more potential experiences that will help develop your skills in this area. The most traditional way applicants gain this experience is through a crisis hotline, but by no means is this the only option. Many of the hotlines require a lengthy commitment and beyond the time someone may be living in a certain area, and we understand that. Working with hospice or doing bereavement counseling are great settings to build counseling skills. Volunteering at Planned Parenthood is great, especially if you can take histories as opposed to scheduling appointments. volunteering at a local hospital, especially if it can be in an ICU or emergency room setting versus a general medicine clinic, working at a summer camp for individuals with disabilities and their families, volunteering at a support group organization for individuals with a common condition or that are working through a similar issue. The common theme that you probably hear is that we want you to develop skills on building interpersonal communication skills in more difficult situations. With both of these areas, we're often asked if something counts. Well, the question makes perfect sense as you want to make sure the application has all of the I's dotted and the T's crossed. Consider the opportunities that you're obtaining the start of your genetic counseling journey. If you can say that you obtained counseling skills and you have a solid understanding of the genetic counseling field, then it counts. And obviously there are a lot of other aspects to one's application that can help them stand out as a strong candidate that we haven't even talked about here. Examples might include teaching experience or lab experience or having leadership experience, but I really just wanted to cover the prerequisites, which are considered the minimal experiences that people have to come in with to be considered for the program. So looking at the timeline, which hopefully most people are aware of the first date listed here, the applications for this upcoming cycle are due on December 15th, and this is the cycle for which you would begin the program in the fall of 2016. Here at Sarah Lawrence, strictly because of numbers, we have a rolling process in which we invite people to come in for interviews. So if your friend receives an email about an interview and you do not, it does not mean that you have not been selected for an interview. The rolling process really happens over like 2 months, over the February and March time frame, and it's just because of the sheer number of applications that we get that we send them out in batches. And then for the interviews themselves, they happen during March and April. The dates are yet to be determined and typically get released when we send out the invitations for the interviews. And we typically have 5 or 6 separate date options that occur during those 2 months. And then in terms of finding out about whether you have been accepted to the program, that will happen on April 25th, 2016, and that's the case for all North American programs. We coordinate, it's called Universal Notification Day, and all programs release their decisions on that day. So kind of all of that information jam-packed into a very short amount of time. I really want to focus on the application itself. Hopefully you have seen already that we have an online format for applications. From our website, you can find on the right-hand side the teal box that you can apply online. You will be directed to a first-time users window where you'll create an account and ask to start a new application. I'm really starting from the beginning here since you're all likely at different stages of this application process, and I want to make sure that the majority of people's questions are answered, and then again we will open it up for more specific questions that you may have after we go through some of the basics. So once you start a new application after receiving some instructions, you'll see the sections of the application that are listed here in blue. Personal background, your personal information, background, application have a lot of yes and no questions you've probably filled out on many applications in your past. Genetic supplement is really where the bulk of our application questions fall, and it includes information about coursework, about other skills and awards that you may have. It includes advocacy and healthcare experience that we just discussed. It includes genetic counseling experience, extracurricular experience, and also your personal statement, which we'll talk a little bit more about. I've pulled actual screenshots from the online system that hopefully you can see here, and we'll see where exactly you can put aspects of your experience, so you know exactly where to put it into the online system. So here you'll see under coursework, under the genetic supplement, that you'll be asked to enter each individual course that fulfills either the required or the recommended courses. It'll ask you for information about, obviously, the course name, the course number, the institution, which you will select from a drop-down menu, and number of credits, the letter grade, and if the course is currently in progress. These blue labels are links where you can click on them, and then these set of options will open and you can enter the same information for each of those categories as well. The coursework is actually in two sections of the application. This is where the required and recommended courses are listed individually, and then if you're to go back here and see that there's an academic section just below this is where you would enter the degrees that you have obtained and the GPAs that you received from those institutions that you received those degrees from. So I just wanted to point out the difference between those two places, as that can get confusing for people. So moving on from coursework, this is where the advocacy or healthcare experience gets listed. We want you to put the name of the organization, who your supervisor might have been, the time frame with which you did this volunteer work, or most typically volunteer work. It can be paid. And then briefly describing your role. A couple sentences is sufficient. Were you answering phones? Were you taking patient histories? Were you in a policy role? Really kind of what was your role when you were working in this organization. Similarly, for the genetic counseling section, we want to know the name of the genetic counselor that you interacted with, what type of service. This is mostly for shadowing. Did you observe, and what was your experience shadowing in that area? If you were unable to shadow, this is what you see on the bottom of the screen is where you would put that you were unable to shadow due to HIPAA restrictions, but you were able to do informational interviews, for example, with multiple genetic counselors. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you can either put those details here or you can put some of those details on your CV as well. That is a personal choice. But if you are unable to shadow, really the information would go in this box about how you gained other exposure to the field. Okay, I'm just going to keep going through each of these sections. I know probably a lot of questions are being generated, but we can go back to each one individually. Also in the genetic supplement is the personal statement, which is a very important aspect of your application. For us, it is often the first thing that we read, and it's an opportunity for us to get to know you. So please make your personal statements personal. If you say you like genetics but want to work with people, you'll probably sound like 199 other people. Give us more specifics. Make genetic counseling be your passion versus a career of exclusion. Remember, we have your CV, so it's better to talk about a few examples with insight than to use the personal statement to tell us everything you have accomplished. And hopefully it goes without saying, please proofread your statement. It helps a lot to read an application that has the right school name, for instance, in it and is grammatically correct. There are a couple places in the genetic supplement where you can put additional pieces about your background that don't really have another distinct home. So there's a place where you can list other skills that you may have, and there's a place for comments where you can really clarify any of your answers. So a lot of times when people are sending individual emails, they're asking, this doesn't quite fit anywhere, or how do I let you know X, Y, or Z? And these two boxes, again, are places where you can put that information that doesn't have another home, for lack of a better description. So moving on to the academic section, which is moving down a tab on the left-hand side. This is where you'll put the schools that you've attended, both for undergraduate and graduate work. You'll put if a degree was obtained for those schools or not, the years or dates in which you attended those schools, and what your cumulative GPA was for those schools. Under this course list, you don't have to go back through and re-enter all of the courses you did in the genetic supplement. This is really just courses that you're currently enrolled in or that are pending as part of your application. So these are really just the additional courses that either did not fit or ones that you are currently enrolled in. So keep that in mind. Awards and honors is an area that is duplicated between the genetic supplement and the academic section. You don't have to enter things twice, so you can enter it whichever place you get to first. It doesn't matter which of the two sections you put your awards and honors. So moving on to your resume. A lot of people wonder if there's a specific format we're looking for in your resume. The answer is no. There's no page minimum, there's no page maximum, there's no particular format. It is helpful for your resume to include your academics and where you've gone to school, what your GPA was, obviously your work experience, your volunteer experience, things that you think are relevant. It's a nice place to have a snapshot of everything you've done that's relevant to your application to be a part of the program. One section that is helpful for us to have is an exposure to genetic counseling section. Again, it's kind of a snapshot for us, and this is just one sample way to include it. It does not have to be done this way. It can be done in a variety of ways. But you can see there's a section called Exposure to Genetic Counseling. Here I've listed 3 shadowing experiences that I may have had, and I've listed a couple informational interviews that I've had with other genetic counselors. So this is not a place where I'm going to put paragraphs of information about these experiences. I'm simply going to list them so that I can suggest, just like other work experience, that I've actually done these things. It is helpful for us to have this in your resume also. So this is one way to do it. You don't have to do it this way. I just wanted to give you guys a sample. So a couple other sections. There is a place for work experience. It does say that it can be professional and volunteer, paid and unpaid. Here we would ask you to put things that you did not already talk about in the genetic supplement. So you do not have to repeat the advocacy work you did, or do not have to repeat any type of internship or counseling volunteer work you've done. This is more for kind of your work experience, other things that were not relevant in your genetics supplement. Again, we're not looking to have you repeat information in multiple sections of your application. It's more work for you guys, it's more work for us, and it's definitely not the intention. So just wanting to kind of clarify some of these often misconceptions. If you have it in both places, it's not a big deal. It's not done wrong by any means, just trying to help you make it more efficient. We know you're already working so hard. There's no need to have to exert extra energy. But if you've already done it, don't worry about it. In terms of recommendation letters, our system, once you put your recommenders' information into the system, we will automatically generate an email to the recommender asking them to submit a reference on your behalf. It's all done electronically. You do not need to ask them to send you a letter and you have to send it to us. The process is much more streamlined. But recommendations letters are not just a formality. They are really a key part of your application. We just get to know you on paper. The recommendation letters are from people who really know you, so they should be from people who know you well professionally and are current. They don't all have to be academic. In fact, we encourage them not to be. Having letters from people that can speak to different aspects of your strengths and personality is really helpful. For example, if a supervisor from your counseling work or your coach, if you are a captain of a college sports team, is willing to write you a letter, that's great. If you've worked closely with someone from the genetics community, like you've done a 10-week internship with a genetic counselor, we would hope to see a letter from that genetic counselor. On the reverse side of things, if you've done a one-day shadowing with a genetic counselor, it would probably be inappropriate for you to ask that genetic counselor for a recommendation letter because he or she probably does not know you well enough to do so. So those are just some suggestions about recommendation letters. We do suggest that you notify the person that you're asking for a recommendation letter, one, to be willing to do this for you, and two, to let them know to expect an email from Sarah Lawrence requesting the actual letter be submitted. So that will also help streamline the process. And the sooner you can get your recommenders' information in here, the sooner we can contact those people, and the sooner the recommendation letters start to come in. And then lastly, once you get through all of those sections, which I know is not easy, you get to this review screen. And it shows you what you may be missing in your application. So clearly, I only had a few pieces of information in each of those sections to highlight how you would complete it, but I was missing my email address. I didn't sign my financial data form. I only put in one recommender instead of two, for example. So all of these things need to be corrected before my application is considered complete. Once my application is considered complete, I can either save it for later if I want to kind of sleep on it and read it with fresh eyes tomorrow before actually hitting that submit button, or I can submit it, which means it is ready to be reviewed by our admissions committee. So nothing happens with your application while it's in the save pile. You have to hit submit for it to be considered submitted as an application to be reviewed. So once you've done the work and put everything in there, please make sure you hit submit before December 15th, on or before December 15th. So I have done way too much talking at this point, but we have a whole hour to address your individual questions. A bunch have come in already, so what I'm going to try to do is go through them one by one and go from there. So, is there a specific format you'd prefer for the resume or CV? Hopefully I have covered at this point that no, there's no specific format that you need to put that information in. If you're enrolled to take a required class next semester, can you still add the class under required coursework section of the application, or do you just put it under current year courses on the application? It is required to be put under current year courses. You can also put it under the required courses and just put that it's in progress if you are definitively taking it. We just want to make sure that you are, in fact, going to be taking that class before you start the program. Does advocacy and experience working with individuals need to strictly be volunteer work? No, you can be paid for that work. We just want to make sure that you have those skills. So whether it's we get applicants that have come from different professions, that have been social workers in the past and are going for a change of career, or were therapists or other professions in which counseling was a major aspect of their field, in which case having that counseling work has already been fulfilled. In that case, we might recommend doing some more diverse advocacy work, maybe around interacting with somebody with interacting with individuals with disabilities, for example, but it can be a paid position or part of a previous profession as well. I was curious about the transcript requirements as I did my undergraduate degree in Canada. Should I still upload my scanned transcript as is, and then also submit one that has been translated by one of the companies that you mentioned? So that's a great question, and it's a little bit confusing, because some of the Canadian schools do their GPAs in 4.0 scales, and some do them in 4.3 scales. We would recommend that you upload your we upload your transcript as it is in the unofficial transcript uploading slot in the academic section. And with most of the Canadian schools, we do not need to have that translated or interpreted as long as the transcript is in English to any other scale. So if that was a very long, non-succinct answer, let me rephrase that. If your school has your transcript in English and out of a 4.0 or a 4.3 scale, that is sufficient and you should upload your transcript as is. If your transcript is in any other language or out of any other scale, then yes, you would need to have that interpreted and or translated. Hopefully that's a little bit more understandable. In the application section, why do you ask for other university colleges to where I'm applying? Many schools do. It has always been part of our application process. Some programs we overlap with a lot in terms of how we approach things in the culture of our program. In some schools we have very, very different training models from. So it is often helpful to us to see if you're applying to all very small schools in us, if you're applying to all schools that have very much a more scientific focus in us. We don't use it for any aspect of any application decisions. It's more in the process of the interview discussion that we can get a sense of what you're looking for out of a program. If all of the advocacy shadowing experiences are included on the resume in detail, is it required to include them directly on the application? Yes. Even if it's on your CV, it is important to fill out the advocacy section of the genetic supplement. That is one, the CV will likely have some overlapping information to other aspects of the application. But it is very important that the advocacy experience in the genetic counseling experience section of the genetic supplement be completed. In the academic tab courses I am currently enrolled in, should I list all my courses, example art history, or just relevant courses that I'm currently enrolled in? Just the ones that are relevant to the program. So if they're statistics-based, science-based, math-based, or psychology-based, I would include them, or to use your discretion if they're relevant. Otherwise, I would probably leave them out because we know many people are coming right from undergraduate and may be enrolled in a whole host of other courses. I am aware that there are 2 required recommendations. However, how many additional recommenders are acceptable? That's a great question. We get it a lot. We don't have a limit per se, but please keep in mind that we are reading over 200 applications. So we want people that can speak to different aspects of your qualifications as a genetic counseling student and a genetic counseling professional, but it is very difficult for us to read 5, 6, 7 recommendation letters. So to really be, what's the word I'm looking for? To really think about the people you're considering to write recommendation letters, and if they are going to speak to the same aspects of you, if you can narrow it down and just ask one of them. For instance, if you have 3 professors, can you narrow it to 2? If you have 2 people that might speak to your counseling work, can you narrow it to 1? So to be discerning in who you ask, but we don't want you to not ask someone if you think it would be an important aspect of your application. So if you submit, many people submit 3. If you feel you really need to submit 4, that is fine. We will read them all. Much more than that is difficult for us to really read all of them when we have so many applications. Would you like 1 page for the resume, or can we send it in 2 pages? The resume does not have a page minimum or a page maximum, so it can be as many pages as you need it to be. When you are uploading it, it is helpful if it is 1 file, though. So if you can upload it as a single file, that would be preferable. I was wondering if official GRE scores need to be sent, or if personally reported scores on the online application will fulfill the requirement. We need both. So you personally write in your scores in the application, but we do require the official report as well. We recognize that for many people taking the GREs this month, the official report may not reach us till the beginning of January, and that is okay. But the official report does need to accompany your application at some time. If we have a shadowing internship planned with a genetic counselor after the application deadline, where should we indicate that? I would put that in the section under genetic counseling experience. I would put that right in this box under add genetic counseling experience. I would put that you have arrangements made to shadow a genetic counselor this winter, or this spring. I think that's pretty common, and you are not alone in that many of these types of counseling experiences or genetic counseling exposures will be coming after your application deadline. So if you have something concrete lined up, I would put it in this section that you see on the screen now. If you plan to just potentially do something, I don't think that necessarily would belong here. But if you have something concrete lined up, that definitely should be indicated here. For a personal statement, it says a maximum of 5,300 characters. Does that include spaces? Now, this came up on a previous webinar, and I'd ask you to write in where you see those instructions, because the instructions on the personal statement, as you'll see right here, suggest that the limit is 750 words. But you are not the first person to ask about the 5,300 character limit. So I but we can't seem to find those instructions anywhere. So if you can help us out and help clarify where you're finding that instruction, that would be very helpful. But to everybody else on the call, the personal statement limit is 750 words, so you don't have to worry about characters or spaces or anything along those lines. Do Canadian schools with a 4.0 GPA scale need to submit a WES evaluation? No, as long as the transcript is in English. If, for instance, you went to a French university and the transcript is in French, then it does need to be translated, but otherwise, no. Hello, I have applied yet, and hold on, I'm going to read this. I have not applied yet. Okay. Lab is not required for the courses, for the prerequisite courses, but many students report that having lab experience does benefit them in the program. So it's not required, but there can be a benefit. How strict are the prerequisite courses for admissions? For instance, my school does not offer human embryology or vertebrate developmental biology. That is a great question. It's probably the #1 question we get, or at least I get as Director of Admissions. And it's probably the #1 prerequisite course not offered at undergraduate institutions. So we are strict with the prerequisite courses because we want to set you up to succeed in grad school and not fail. Human embryology is one of the courses you take your first semester here, and without having any foundational knowledge in it, it will be a very difficult first semester here, and that's not what you need when you're first entering and adjusting to grad school. So University of Cincinnati has an online embryology course that is created to be a prerequisite for students entering healthcare professions. I'd say more than 60% of our applicants do this online embryology course through the University of Cincinnati. You can take it not for credit, and it still produces a letter at the end of the course that will have a letter grade on it, and that letter can be uploaded to your application as proof of your grade in that class. So if you have not had embryology or vertebrate developmental biology, you do need to take an embryology class, but University of Cincinnati is a course that online that can be done at your own pace and what fits into your schedule, and is probably the #1 embryology course taken by prospective students going into genetic counseling. So next question is, I have a BS in chemistry, but have only taken one genetics course called Genetics and Society. I haven't taken cellular genetics aside from what was covered in biochemistry and other chemistry classes. Would I still qualify for the program if the rest of my application is strong? If the Genetics and Society class covered both molecular and Mendelian genetics, and you have the other prerequisites, then you have taken the prerequisites for the program. If you have a basic biology class, a basic chemistry class, it seems like you've taken biochemistry. A lot of times molecular and Mendelian genetics are rolled into the same course and not separated into two different courses, and that is fine. We just want to make sure, again, you have the foundational knowledge in both of those areas of genetics. So hopefully that helps answer that question. If my university doesn't offer one of the required courses, but we covered that topic in detail in a more general class, is that still accepted? If you feel that you have covered that topic thoroughly, and if you go back to your professor of that course, and he or she thinks that you are prepared to tackle graduate level work in that area, then it is accepted in our book. We defer that decision to the professors of the courses or to your academic advisors, with the caveat that, we would prefer those individuals making those decisions as opposed to you guys making them on your own, just because of the caveat that the work here is very hard, it's very rigorous, and a lot of times when people have had a couple weeks of a topic in a class, they may think it's sufficient, but then when they come and have a very in-depth class for a full semester, they realize they do not have enough foundational knowledge and they're very overwhelmed and not prepared academically. So it really should be the professor or the academic advisor making that decision as to whether you are prepared for graduate level work in that area. But yes, even if it's part of another class, that is sufficient. I am getting trained to become an advocacy counselor now. Should I note that as advocacy counseling experience? Again, that's a great question. Like I said, with the genetic counseling experience, we know a lot of this is coming up. You can put the advocacy work in under the advocacy thing here, and from volunteer work, put the date and put that you are currently in training, but you have not begun actual calls or whatever the counseling advocacy work will look like, and that can also be on your CV. Some schools I am applying to will accept one AP class to count for a prerequisite. For example, I took AP Psychology in high school, so I did not retake it in college. Does Sarah Lawrence also accept an AP class to count? It really would depend on what subject. We don't require psychology, but having psychology background is great, and having it, whether it be in undergrad or AP, is sufficient. Having an AP credit, for instance, in genetics, probably would not be sufficient. So it would really be dependent on the course. So psychology, yes. Genetics, no. So for the required courses, I guess I would say no, and for the recommended courses, I would say yes. But the recommended courses are just that. They're recommended, so it isn't about having something from that count. It's more about having that knowledge be of benefit to you in the program. So should all informational interviews, short-term shadowing experiences go on the resume? Also, what about educational events such as boot camps that we attended? Should we include those there too? That's a great question and something I missed. So yes, if you can, I'm just going to go back to the CV slide. Depending on how much shadowing and how many informational interviews you did, capturing your exposure in some way should be on your CV. So if you've shadowed for, hypothetically, 300 hours, you don't need to list them all out individually. Maybe you just put it in one big bulk. Similarly, if you've done informational interviews with a whole host of genetic counselors, you may not want to list them out individually, but you want to capture that you've had that much exposure. And I think it would be great if you do include attendance at boot camps, career days, intensive genetic counseling camps, things like that. So I forgot that on this example, but if you can include that there, I think that would be great. On the website, it asks that the personal statement be answered in a question format. Please make sure to include all writing materials with each sheet clearly labeled, indicating the specific question. Okay, so I think the question around the personal statement, the confusion around the personal statement often comes up between a difference in the instructions on the website and a difference in the instructions on the online application system. It's important to remember that the website may apply to all different programs across Sarah Lawrence, undergraduate and graduate, or multiple graduate programs. And our online system is created just for our genetics program. So our personal statement is found within our genetics supplement specific for our genetic counseling program. So when answering the personal statement, please follow the instructions that you see on this screenshot, which is taken directly from the online application system. So any other instructions that you're seeing about personal statement from a Sarah Lawrence website, which I'm going to say ignore, which I know sounds like very odd advice, but I am going to say ignore and follow the online instructions in the application system directly. Is it acceptable if you have not completed the advocacy requirement but are currently beginning an advocacy experience that would be completed prior to the interview time period? Absolutely. This is an ongoing process, we know, for everybody. And December 15th is a date by which we need to have all of the information so we can start reviewing information. But your journey into genetic counseling doesn't arbitrarily stop there. So we hope that even if you're submitting your application on December 15th, you're continuing to strengthen yourself as a genetic counseling candidate after that point. That being said, obviously the more information we have in your application, the more we have to go by when deciding about inviting somebody to come for an interview. So the more complete the application, or the more complete your experience is at the time of the application deadline, the more we have to go by. But many individuals are still working on gaining some of their prerequisite experience that they will get between the application deadline and the interview, and then we'll be able, if they are invited for an interview, we'll be able to talk about those experiences at the interview itself. If we attended seminars or events such as the NSGC AEC, which is the annual education conference, should we mention these in our application? Where would we do that? That's a great question, and you should definitely put it in your application. Where exactly? There's not a great place. You can either put it here under genetic counseling experience. You should definitely put it in your CV under genetic counseling, exposure to genetic counseling. You can have something like meetings attended as a heading or something to that effect, but you should absolutely put meetings like the NSGC conference in your application. And then you can lastly use this section in terms of comments to write out anything additional that you've done, like attending the AEC, to put here because it doesn't fit nicely in the genetic counseling section, for instance. So that's one of those examples that doesn't have a great home. So it should definitely be on your CV, and whether you choose to put it under comments here or under genetic counseling experience is up to you. What is emphasized most in your program? Counseling, science, ethics, clinical. That is a great question. And every program has the same basic requirements, and we all go about it a little bit different. We are pretty balanced with both the science and the psychosocial. Individuals that come to our program get more than 1,000 clinical training hours in various areas of genetic counseling, prenatal, pediatrics, cancer, as well as emerging areas in laboratory, industry, specialty areas if they're of interest to the student, such as bioethics, etc. But as a curriculum, we are very balanced between science and psychosocial. If I took a summer course, when I list it under institutions, can I leave out the degree obtained section since I did not receive a degree? If you list under institutions, if you list the institution, it will ask you if you received a degree from that institution, and you can select no. So please do put the institution, and please select no as to whether you received a degree from that school. Will my application be considered if my GRE exam is completed on December 17th? Since you already have a test date and it's within a couple days, I don't perceive that to be a problem. If there's specific questions around it, you can contact me individually. For how long do I have to shadow a genetic counselor? How many should I shadow? There's no have to, and there's no amount of hours, or there's no minimums. Again, this is about preparing yourself as best as possible for the field. So the more you can shadow, the better, because it'll give you more perspective as to the variations in our field, the various different roles a genetic counselor can play, the different types of clients or patients that we may see. Some individuals have no opportunities to shadow. Some people may have only a day that they can shadow based on HIPAA or based on the institution's policies. Some people are able to shadow for an entire summer full-time. So it really varies. You can expect to be asked the question of how you tried to obtain shadowing if you do not have shadowing in your application. And as long as you've done everything you can, even if you are not able to shadow, that's okay. But we want people that want to do this and are exploring every avenue that they can to get this experience. So I would just say to try to get as much as you can, which I know is a pretty vague answer, but the more the better. If possible, would you be able to go back to the slide that showed suggestions for how to include informational interviews on the resume? Absolutely. There we go. Okay. So while that's up, there's a question, does an academic reference have to be someone who taught you a specific course, or can it be an undergraduate thesis supervisor? It can absolutely be an undergraduate thesis supervisor. In fact, I would argue that probably an undergraduate thesis supervisor gets to know you much better than a professor in a course, especially if you're at a big undergraduate institution, so absolutely. When it says, if publication, please include reference, what about if the research paper is currently in submission to a scientific journal? Again, that would be in your CV. If you have a section called publications, you can indicate, under review. If I have a BS in biology and did not complete an embryology class, is it mandatory requirement? Sorry, I'm just reading through the full question. There's a lot of personal details here, so I'm not reading it aloud to the group. Again, I will just repeat, because I know some people are not able to stay on the webinar for the entire session, but the University of Cincinnati has an online embryology class that we would recommend for individuals that are missing the embryology prerequisite. That is just the program that most of our candidates do take when they are missing that prerequisite. It can be taken at your own pace. They don't have a particular enrollment date or day that the class starts, so that tends to be the most flexible for people interested in the program. So again, I would kind of point you in the direction of University of Cincinnati as one possible option. That is definitely not your only option. Does Sarah Lawrence reimburse travel costs when candidates come to campus to interview? That is a great question, and my answer is I wish we could, but we do not. We know it's expensive. I absolutely wish we could, but we interview roughly about 100 people, and we just are not able to do so. What are you looking for in the section of skills, talents, and expertise? I think that's up to your discretion. Some people have a lot of skills that are unrelated to genetic counseling. They're like amazing musicians in certain areas, or just have skills that aren't captured elsewhere in the application that round out kind of who they are. So those can be skills and talents that are related or unrelated to genetic counseling. But it just would be things that you would like us to know about you. So we're not looking for anything particular in that section, but anything that you would like us to know about you that isn't captured elsewhere in terms of particular skills or talents that you are, proud about and would like just to share with us. In regards to the human embryology course, if we enroll in the spring, does that fulfill the requirement even if we are taking another prereq in the spring as well? Yes. Again, for Sarah Lawrence, the rule is that the prerequisites have to be completed before you begin our program. So when you show up for orientation day, you have to have completed all of the prerequisite requirements. But when you complete it prior to orientation day does not matter. That being said, again, I'll just repeat that the more that is completed by the application deadline, the more we have in your application to go by, the more complete the application, the more we have to go by when deciding who to invite for an interview. So it's not uncommon for people to have one prerequisite pending. If people have 3 or more pending, I would recommend waiting for the next cycle. Having 2 pending is right on that line. So if you think you have a strong application otherwise, definitely can apply this cycle. If you have other areas that are also pending, including advocacy and genetic counseling experience, you may want to consider holding off. If those areas, however, are strong, I would say having that coursework happen in the spring is not a problem. I apologize if this is already somewhat covered, but I have some grades that are 3.7 out of 4 rather than A-. Do I convert the grades for the genetics supplement or put the number grades or just leave it blank? Every school does grading a little bit differently. If your transcript has letter grades, please put the letter grade in the genetics supplement. And I think the supplement, I'm going to go back just to remind myself, asks for a letter grade. So if you have the equivalent of what that 3.7 equals and can put it in as a letter grade, that would be very helpful. But it is also important that we are able to match that to your transcript at the end of the day. So I'm struggling because I don't know what your transcript exactly has. So if you are able to put it in a letter grade, and if we are able to match that letter grade to your transcript, then that is the best of the scenarios. If that isn't clear with your specific situation, please let me know. I work with people with a wide range of genetic conditions. Would a parent of a client be an appropriate person to ask for a letter of recommendation? My apologies, I can't seem to read. I think if that work is in a professional role, absolutely. I think a parent would be a wonderful person to ask for a recommendation because you're working, they're a client, so you're asking them in a professional way, in a professional role. How soon after the application is submitted are references contacted to upload letters? I'm trying to give an idea to my references as to when to expect to submit their letters, assuming an application submitted on the deadline date. I'm going to defer that to Denise. Immediately. So actually, even before you, Denise, do you have to hit submit on your application for that to go? Or even if they put in the contact information for the individual and are just saving their application, it still goes anyway. Is that correct? Okay. So as soon as you put the recommender's contact information into the online system, that instantaneously generates the email to your recommender, even if you have not submitted your actual application to the program. So as soon as you should let your references know as soon as you put in their information to our system. So Victoria, I'm going to come back to your question because I think it's a great question and I will happily answer it. I'm just going to answer some more of the logistical questions before coming back there. Do you list current classes under courses as well as genetic supplement? Those that are related to, that are recommended or required courses that are currently underway should be listed in both places. Other courses that you're currently involved in do not have to be listed under the coursework in academics, just those that are relevant to genetic counseling. So follow up to the question on transcript. If your transcripts only have numbers, for now, please input it as numbers because we have not yet uploaded a scale to convert numbers to letters. So to input the information as the numbers if that's what your transcript has. So we do not have a conversion scale for you to use, so I would input the information as numbers. For GPA within your major under academics, should we calculate that if it's not calculated on the transcript? What courses are included in that, in the discipline of your major, or courses required for major? So that's a great question. So not all schools include GPA within your major on your transcript, but we do ask for it in our application. So if you are left to calculate that on your own, you would use the coursework that is required for your major to calculate your GPA in your major. And how important is the financial data portion of the application? Is it okay if we haven't done all our research into scholarships before the deadline? That is a question that I will defer to Roberta Daskin because she is the expert on financial aid. So I have her information up here if you want to write down her phone number or her email address and just shoot her an email or give her a quick call to ask her that question, and she can provide you that information. So unfortunately, Rob was not able to join us on the call, but the question is less logistically related and more program related about why I chose Sarah Lawrence. And I can speak to a couple of the things that make Sarah Lawrence unique. So for me personally, I knew I wanted to stay on the East Coast and particularly in the Northeast region for family reasons. I was looking for a program that had a good balance of psychosocial and science, and I wanted, the big class size was very appealing to me. I wanted to be able to work on projects and take classes in group work with different students in different at different times. And because the field is so small and networking is so important, coming out of a program with so many colleagues was a very important factor to me. So those were my personal reasons. But I can tell you a little bit about kind of what makes Sarah Lawrence unique. And what I will preface this is by saying that all of the programs are wonderful. We all have these basic components. You will graduate from any of the programs. You will take a certification exam, and you will be incredibly employable in the field. So it is not as much what program is the best program, but more about what program is a good fit for you. So through this application process, it's really important that you're interviewing programs as much as we're interviewing you guys, because you don't want to be miserable for 2 years. We want you to go somewhere where you're happy and where it's a good fit for you. So program culture is a really important aspect of anywhere you go. Some of the cultural aspects of our program that make us unique is our location. We are not located in a medical school. We are located in a very small liberal arts college in the suburbs of New York City. It is very much beautiful countryside up here. You will not drive by a medical school anywhere near the college. And all of these have pros and cons. Because we are not associated with one medical school, we are able to have a very diverse clinical training network at many universities, many medical centers, many hospitals, so you get a very strong, depth and breadth of clinical training experience versus all of it being under one roof. The downside to not being part of a medical school is you have to travel to all of those clinical placements, which can be farther away. We do not have, many of our classes are taught by these professionals in the surrounding area, so these professors are not readily accessible right here on campus. They all come up to teach classes, so class time can be in large chunks. Most classes tend to be 2 to 3 hours at a time once a week, as opposed to what you may be more used to at an undergraduate level. But we're also very independent, being a large genetic counseling program in a liberal arts college, in that if we want to make changes and keep our program very up to date, we can do that without a lot of levels of review. So if we want to add a class now for next semester, we can do that without taking 2 years to go through various departments at a medical school to get that approved from various departments. So again, there are pros and cons to these things. So that's one thing that makes us very different from other schools. Our class size makes us very different from other programs. We tend to have on average 25 students, which may seem small in comparison to undergraduate programs or undergraduate classes, but to genetic counseling programs is quite large, as you may have seen in your research. Our first year class is actually 31 students. Our philosophy is you can make a big class smaller, but you cannot make a small class bigger. Our classes are all taught to genetic counseling students. There are no PhD biology students. There are no med students. There are no any other students in the class. So it's all taught to what is relevant to you in your clinical practice, in your laboratory practice, in your industry practice going forward. That being said, you are in the same group of students all day, every day. So we think it's important that there's a large mixture of personalities and diverse backgrounds to interact with. And we do a lot of team-based learning. We do a lot of group work, and having that large class size allows you to work with different people at different times. So those are really two of the big differences between our program and other programs. The way we, what this leads to in terms of clinical training for us and the way we approach our research project is also quite different, but that is the those are the two big distinctive factors, and I think the reason why people often come or do not come to Sarah Lawrence. The other aspect of location in terms of why people do come is our proximity to New York City. Even though we're in a small suburban area, we're about a 30-minute train ride from Manhattan. And it's a very easy commute in. Some students actually live in the city and just come up for classes. I live in the city and come up each day. So it's a very doable commute. And we're very close to New York City, which has some of the most, reputable hospitals, physicians, researchers in the world. So that's another aspect of location I failed to mention. So hopefully that gives you some flavor. But again, if you come for an interview, you will meet with multiple people on our admissions committee, our students, representatives from our graduate studies office to really get a sense as to what the flavor is of the program, because that is very important. What is the board exam passing rate for new graduates at SLC? It's a great question. I wish I had a great answer for you because it fluctuates every cycle. I can tell you this past August, we had a 100% passing rate for new graduates. So the board exam is offered now twice a year, and sometimes there's new graduates that take it. Sometimes there's a larger group of genetic counselors and past graduates that have taken it. But for new graduates that graduated in May of 2015 and took the exam in August 2015 from Sarah Lawrence, there was a 100% passing rate. But the rate for SLC overall fluctuates a bit year to year. So it's about 5:20. We have about 10 minutes left. Are there any other questions that we have not gotten to? Okay, so this is a great question. Our system, unfortunately, does not allow for a double major to be entered. It only allows for one major and one minor at the undergraduate level. So often people have to put one of their majors as the major and one of their majors as the minor, which is unfortunate because we know that's not what you actually did. You worked much harder than that. You can put two separate degrees from one institution if you wanted to be able to put both of those major GPAs, but most people tend to put one major and one minor. The major GPA that we have you enter is really kind of a quick glance. We don't use that for calculating much of the application as a whole. So I would put you can put whichever major you want under major and put the other one under minor. And I would just put under the section that allows you to put any information that clarifies any of the answers above, so this comment section. You can put into, on the academics, I was a double major. You can put that there. I know that was not very clear, but you can do, either one is fine. Your CV will very clearly reflect the information that you are a double major and you have these two major GPAs, and that is really where we will look for that information. Should I mention shadowing genetic doctors on the application? You can definitely do that as under where am I? Under the genetic counseling experience. Because if you're not able to shadow or meet with a genetic counselor, but you were able to shadow or meet with genetic doctors, you can put that in this paragraph here. Because you may have great exposure to cases and be able to envision how a genetic counselor may or may not have changed the session or impacted the session, and this would be a great place to at least indicate that you've seen some of those types of cases. Are international summer rotations permissible in the program? Great question. So in terms of clinical rotations, we assign your rotations during the first and second year that you're here, but the summer rotation is yours to go wherever you want. You can stay local to New York and we will help facilitate that. You can go somewhere else in the country and we will help facilitate that. You can go international and we will help you try to facilitate that. So you can go absolutely anywhere you would like to go for your summer rotation. So there's a question about the resume in terms of what we're looking for. Again, there's no format, there's no page minimum, there's no page maximum. The similar things that you would put on any other resume in terms of academics, work experience, etc., but having an exposure to genetic counseling section on the resume is helpful. If there are other questions, we didn't go through any other information about the resume than what you see on the screen here. There is a question about the recommendation and the waiver, and I'm going to defer that to Denise.
Hi, I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but if you're referring to you checked the wrong box on the waiver form and you've already submitted your application, I may be able to change it for you. So can you send us an email to grad@saralawrence.edu and I'll take a look at it and see if we can fix that for you. Please explain exactly what you wanted to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. So our interviews usually completed during the week or on the weekend. Traditionally here at Sarah Lawrence, they're typically during the week. We may have one date option on a Saturday, but traditionally most of the dates are during the week. We try to do more on Fridays, so towards the end of the week versus the middle of the week, but there'll be 5 or 6 different date options to choose from. Okay. It looks like we have covered the questions, so hopefully this was helpful in answering your individual questions or learning from each other's questions. Sorry if it kind of information came at you, kind of steamrolled like a train, but I know applications are due next week, so I hope most of you that are applying this cycle are somewhere in the process, and this kind of helped to facilitate those kind of last minute questions that you guys still had. So hopefully this was helpful. If you guys have further questions, please email us. You can email me individually, or probably what is most helpful is if you email our departmental email, which is geneticcounseling@saralawrence.edu. We will get back to you guys as quickly as we can. We know applications are due very soon. We get hundreds of emails. We will try to respond individually, but if you are part of this webinar and can go and review the webinar, if you know the question has been asked and answered, that would be incredibly helpful as well. So good luck to you guys. We really look forward to reading your applications and really glad you guys can join us. Thank you guys and have a good night.